Funding for Frontline is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Tonight on Frontline, Nicaragua, where the U.S. is acting against a government it doesn't like and fighting a war by proxy.
At the beginning, people came in full of vim and vigor and thought, here we are, the Dragon Slayer.
The political war in Washington and the real war in Nicaragua.
This is the diabolical nature of the thing, using people to wage a war with little political cost for the adventurer.
Tonight, War on Nicaragua.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline with Judy Woodruff.
Good evening. Once more, a political drama is unfolding in Washington. In the months to come, as Congress investigates the Iran arms scandal, we will follow, in numbing detail, a trail of arms and money from the White House to Tehran, from Switzerland to Miami, and finally, it seems, to Central America and the Nicaraguan contras. When the scandal first broke, Frontline correspondent William Greider was in Nicaragua examining a different story, but one that he believes really lies at the heart of the crisis in the White House, a story that the congressional committees will not examine in full, the story of the policy that led up to the present scandal. His report is called War on Nicaragua. It is produced by Sherry Jones.
The war is fought in places like this, Miraflores, a mountaintop cooperative in northern Nicaragua. Here, when they are planting beans or working the cornfields, one peasant must always stand guard. From the cover of mountain mists, the contras often attack.
When the contras came, the women were confused and afraid and thought that they were our own people. One of the contras looked into a window in the house where the women were hiding. He probably thought that the guards were inside, so he threw a grenade through the window. He killed 5 people altogether, including 2 children and a teacher. The child who died was my son, and the teacher my sister.
No Americans are fighting or dying here, yet it is very much America's war. 6 years into the conflict, some basic questions still need to be asked. Why is the United States engaged in this struggle? What is different about this war? Why these people? Why here? There are only 3 million people in Nicaragua. Per capita income is $720 a year. This is what is known in Washington as third world poverty. Yet these people live close enough to the United States to see how we live and to mimic the symbols of our prosperity. Since July 1979, Nicaragua has been ruled by the revolutionary Sandinista Front, a government that has committed the nation to radical change, for better or worse.
De la dictadura a la revolución, You're asking how life has changed since the revolution? Twice as good. 40,000 times. We have land, we have money, we have technical knowledge. Compared to what we had yesterday, when we had nothing, we are the owners of the land today. We have, as I was telling my friends, a little bit of everything.
Many feel threatened by the changes, including some in Nicaragua's middle class, like this woman who owns her own bakery.
Now you pay for everything. Everything is taxes. Everything is limited. Everything is rationed. You go to buy something for your family, and they give you a little loaf of bread to last for a week. Lies. They say things that make them sound good, so people will say they're good. But they're lies. They are monsters of evil.
The Sandinista revolutionary goals are planted in barren soil. It is a nation of peasants who work with oxen instead of tractors, machetes instead of machines. Like the other small nations of Central America, it is a country that is devoutly Catholic, underdeveloped, desperately poor. These are the people who must learn a new national anthem, proclaiming their own independence and their attitude toward the U.S. as well. The Yankee, they sing, the enemy of mankind. Nicaragua is a country with only 5 elevators, yet it became a central preoccupation of American foreign policy. The questions that usually dominate Washington debate about the nature of the Sandinistas and their political opposition in Nicaragua are not the focus of this program. Instead, we will examine a more provocative question about ourselves, about how the United States claimed the right to intervene against a sovereign government it didn't like, and about the methods it decided to use this time, both at home and on the battlefield. It all started 6 years ago, in the first days of Ronald Reagan's presidency. January 20th, 1981. The new president's promise to restore America's strength is designed to erase lingering memories of Vietnam and to demonstrate to the Soviet Union that America is no longer paralyzed.
At the beginning, people came in full of vim and vigor and thought, here we are, the dragon slayers. We're going to go out and slay all the dragons, and Ronald Reagan is going to go down as the greatest president around. And Ronald Reagan didn't lose that election. He won it with a fairly nice mandate. And his whole campaign was anti-Soviet. So I'm sure...
John Carbo was a foreign policy advisor to the new administration.
We were saying, stay out of our hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine still applies. Go off and fight your war somewhere else. Leave us alone.
The new administration views the U.S.-Soviet rivalry as the world's central struggle. To the Reagan team, the cluster of tiny nations in Central America seems the right battleground.
The president has put it very well when he said that the future of 100 million people from Panama to the open border on our south is at stake. And I think one thing we Americans need to do is to take Marxist-Leninists seriously. They view all of Central America as needing to be liberated, and all the Sandinistas leaders have said that. So if...
Constantine Menges was the National Security Council's chief Latin America strategist.
Because they would now be smuggling thousands of young Nicaraguan soldiers disguised as communist guerrillas from El Salvador into El Salvador and Guatemala. Then they would say, well, we've got to have a big shield to deter Guatemala and El Salvador from hitting us directly. And then when they had those countries under communist control, with Mexico having 80 million people, they would need an even bigger army from all of the Central American countries as they start to work with the Mexican internal far left to destabilize Mexico. And then, of course, when they're at our border, they'd need an even bigger army because then they'd be undertaking operations against the United States directly. And so you see, in the logic of Marxist-Leninist movements that see the entire planet as needing to come under communist control, they will always need to have a huge army.
When the Sandinistas triumphed, they did not disguise their contempt for the United States. For 35 years, America had supported the brutal Somoza dictatorship here. For decades, it had attacked Latin revolutions. They expect the same.
Before Reagan came to power, we'd heard his political positions, and we knew the new government will be a threat to Nicaragua. It made hope more distant. It didn't kill it because you can't kill hope, but it made it more distant. And we were sure that when the Reagan administration took office, we will be faced with aggressive policies bent on destroying the Nicaraguan revolution.
The Sandinistas declare solidarity with the Latin revolution that has survived, Cuba and Fidel Castro. To Washington policymakers, this is a portent of Soviet influence. To Nicaragua, it is a declaration of independence.
Nicaragua demands, doesn't beg, but demands a new type of relationship. On the 19th of July,
Miguel Viscoto is the foreign minister of Nicaragua.
Enough is enough. From now on, we want friendship. That means we want to relate on the basis of sovereign equality and legal equality. We may be very small, we are very small and impoverished, but we believe that we're entitled to the full exercise of our sovereignty. We do not accept this status that the U.S. government has imposed and would like to maintain over us, the status of a backyard nation.
The question is how the two countries will work out their differences, by force or by diplomacy. And when the Sandinistas are caught supplying weapons to the guerrillas in neighboring El Salvador, the United States is alarmed.
We were worried about the effect of their engaging in countries on their borders and causing disruption.
Lawrence Pizzulo was our ambassador to Nicaragua.
Their concern was that they were surrounded by countries who were enemy states, especially to the north, who were going to be hostile to them. Plus they had romantic ties, and more than that, real ties with some of those guerrilla groups who they knew and who had befriended them during their period in the mountains. Now, what you had to do was get these two different positions, and through a patient discussion and understanding, have them reach a point where there was an accord.
While the U.S. ambassador negotiates, unknown to him, officials in Washington are pursuing a different strategy. Just 6 weeks after his inaugural, on March 9, 1981, President Reagan signs a secret directive. Nicaragua is declared a threat to El Salvador, and ultimately to the United States. On authority of the president's signature, the CIA sends its operatives into the field. In the countries on Nicaragua's borders, small rebel armies have formed, financed by wealthy exiles, and composed largely of veterans of Somoza's dreaded National Guard. The CIA will secretly organize among the scattered groups, attempting to unify them into one opposition force to confront the Sandinistas. At the same time, in Managua, Pizzulo warns Ortega that if Nicaragua wishes to avoid conflict with the United States and the loss of millions of dollars in U.S. aid, they must stop shipping arms to El Salvador. Ortega gets the message.
We spoke to Pizzulo about the issue, and we asked that information be shared, because we knew there was concern that Nicaraguan territory was being used to supply arms to the Salvadoran guerrillas. We kept in touch and dismantled the place being used for the transport.
This administration has made strong representations to the Nicaraguans to cease...
In Washington, the State Department confirms that Nicaragua has stopped shipping arms.
Their response has been positive. We have no hard evidence of arms movements through Nicaragua during the past...
But despite Nicaragua's compliance, the administration announces that it is cutting off economic aid anyway.
I think it was a landmark decision. because it set a tone, it set a psychological, it's sort of a psychological benchmark in the relationship, which was very difficult to ever recapture. And that was my argument. Don't do it. You can always cut off that aid program. We don't have to give them the money. We can keep that money, for as long as we want. Once you've done it, it's one of those acts you can't redo, you can't undo.
November 16th, 1981, the day the choice is made to deal with Nicaragua by force. Reagan's National Security Council gathers for a secret session. Some advisors will argue that the U.S. should send its own troops and swiftly eliminate the Sandinistas. But the president chooses a less dangerous approach, war by proxy. He signs a secret directive with the stated purpose of stopping the flow of arms from Nicaragua to El Salvador. But it also authorizes the CIA to develop a paramilitary force and promises more money and men later, as needed.
The goal was to get the Sandinistas out.
From the beginning?
From the beginning.
That was not what was said.
Well, I can't say that. I can't speak for the president, but I can tell you that in the minds of all those people around him, wherever they are, the so-called true Reaganites, the goal was to move them out.
These are the forces to do it. An army organized and equipped by the American government. After Vietnam, the American public has no stomach for direct U.S. intervention, where American boys will do the dying. So this army will be manned with foreign youth. They're known as the counter-revolutionaries, or contras.
The contras are coming. They're at the crossroads, and they killed a young guy. We couldn't spend the night at home last night. We couldn't even take sheets or blankets with us. We had to sleep out last night, and we're just now heading back to our village.
By early 1982, a war has begun in Nicaragua. The action then is described by a former Contra leader.
They were making small incursions, hit-and-run things, and it was just to attack isolated places or kill a border guard or harass people in a farm, or things like that.
Did those attacks have anything to do with interdicting arms between Nicaragua and El Salvador?
No, in all the time I was involved with the Contras as a director, and before I was made a director, I was in very close contact with the Argentinians and the CIA. They never talk about we are going to stop the flow of weapons to El Salvador or to Honduras.
The border between Nicaragua and its neighbor, Honduras, where the Contras are based, becomes a war zone. The Sandinistas declare a state of emergency and begin to remove peasants from villages in the area. That includes the brutal relocation of the Mosquito Indians, providing the Contras with a growing supply of recruits.
Many of the people at that time were mostly peasants. Some of them have also their own grievances against the Sandinistas. Sandinistas made many mistakes. They mishandled the minority groups in the East Coast. So those people became very anti-government and ready to fight. And then others were also brought by force, intimidated, or they are put in a position they have no choice.
How does that work?
Well, it was, for instance, a commander goes to a town in Nicaragua or close to the border, and then he says, who are here Sandinista supporters? Then they identify 2 or 3. He shouts them in public. Then he asks the rest, do you want to follow me? Well, most people follow them.
Within 6 months, by the summer of 1982, the nature of this war is clear. The proxy army does not confront the Sandinista army in open battles. Its targets are mostly peasant villages.
They took them away. They took our men away. All of them. They took them by force. They took them with their hands tied behind them and a rifle right here. Oh, you're crying, the Contra said. We'll give you something to cry about.
My baby was in the nursery, and the one who was taking care of her was wounded. And when they tried to kill her, they killed the baby. That's the worst part of what they're doing. Killing innocent children who don't know anything.
How can anyone believe they're committing these horrible crimes here? Burning our farmlands, killing our children, killing our friends.
In Washington, this is called low-intensity warfare. It is quite different from the way the U.S. fought in Vietnam. The targets of the attacks include rural health clinics, schools, and farm cooperatives. Nicaragua now recognizes it is at war with the United States, although there are no American soldiers in the field and no declaration of war by the U.S. Congress. December 1982.
And you may think they will overlook the Contras' terrorist tactics, but you are wrong. The American people are outraged.
A year after the Contra Army is organized, some members of Congress are upset by news stories of attacks on villages in Nicaragua.
The fires of communism are burning in Nicaragua.
But the administration has learned another lesson from Vietnam. A war can be lost in Washington as well as on the battlefield. So a move in the Congress to cut off Contra funds means the proxy war has a public relations problem.
Without objection, it's so ordered. Mr. Chairman.
In Miami, the Central Intelligence Agency sets out to improve the image of its proxy army by recruiting a moderate civilian leadership among Nicaraguan exiles. In this hotel, the head of the agency's Central America team talks to Edgar Chamorro, an exiled businessman.
There's a lot of selling of the contras. When I talk to these people, they were interested in seeing this as a product that have to be sold to the American consumer or to Congress. So there was a lot of salesmanship in the process. They needed.
But who was doing that?
The CIA.
13 days before the crucial vote in Congress, the new Contra leadership, including Edgar Chamorro, is presented to the press.
The CIA sat with us. We had yellow pad, everybody, and we were like in a brainstorm session, saying, how do you talk to the press? And then one of the CIA people or whoever it was would ask a question and says, what do you say if they tell you, do you talk to your American officials? I say, of course, we'll say, no, don't say that. Say you never talk to them. And somebody else will drop a question and say, what if they ask you where your money come from? I say, well, from the United States. Don't ever say that. You have to say it from private sources.
Have you had any discussions with an employee of the U.S. government about your struggle? And if so, when and about what?
No.
Dr. Chamorro, with all due respect, you can't come here and expect us to believe that you have no links with the military situation there. This is not happening in a vacuum.
Well, we can tell what we read in the press. That I am being very honest to you. I am not being.
What were they worried about in terms of the image of the FDN at that point?
Well, at that point, the concern was that they needed money. The main concern I received from this man, we need money. And the only people that have money here is Congress.
Congress buys the story, accepting the administration's claim that it is only stopping arms to El Salvador, not making war against Nicaragua. They authorize more money to the CIA, provided it is not used to overthrow the Sandinista government. The so-called Bolin Amendment has the effect of ratifying the secret war, not curbing it.
Congress was locked in a policy that it was faced with the question of whether or not it wanted to pull the rug from under the executive. And the executive knew that it had Congress. And it was basically that simple a dilemma.
And from that point on, then, Congress has to look the other way on some other deceptions.
Well, from that point forward, Congress couldn't have indicated any grave surprise.
The administration's lack of candor, now fixed in law, will lead it into further evasions.
From the point of view of the Nicaraguans who fought there, they weren't hired to help El Salvador or the United States. They wanted to change the situation in their own country. And they meant to change the government or to overthrow it, whatever was needed. So we got into these contradictions. And then we got into quibbling between the administration and Congress as to, well, are you really abiding by not to overthrow? And we said, yes, we are abiding. Of course, we are law-abiding, and this is a law. But then what are your purposes in Nicaragua? If you don't want to overthrow, we have no purpose. You have no strategy. Come on now.
The Boland Amendment has no impact whatsoever on the war on the ground. The Contra Army has grown to 7,000 men, mostly based in Honduras, and from these camps, continued attacks on Nicaragua are launched. The real war is now cloaked in legislative fiction. Its true purpose is known, but is not officially acknowledged.
Lou?
Mr. President, why don't we openly support those 7,000 guerrillas that are in rebellion against it rather than giving aid through covert activity?
Well, because we want to keep on obeying the laws of our country, which we are obeying.
I can follow up, sir.
Everyone in Washington seems to be in on the joke, including the press.
Doesn't the United States want that government replaced?
No, because that would be violating the law.
But, Mr. President, what is the American public to think?
In Honduras, the war's strategy has another dimension. In 1954, Honduras served as the staging area for U.S.-backed intervention against Guatemala to its north. Now, Honduras makes itself available for the U.S. military venture aimed at Nicaragua to the south.
Notice we got everybody at attention before we brought the Air Force through.
Long dependent on U.S. economic support, this country has always been compliant to American wishes. And this time, the Honduran military will receive what for them is a vast fortune, $80 million a year in U.S. funds for arms and training.
Well done.
Honduras is the poorest country in Central America. Per capita income is $560 a year. Nearly half the people are unemployed. Long ruled by the military, its democratically elected government is a new experiment.
We have democracy, a very fragile democracy. As long as this conflict is here, I don't see how Honduras can really stabilize its own democracy. Because you cannot destabilize Nicaragua without destabilizing Honduras and the other countries in Central America. You cannot have a conflict in Nicaragua without affecting the whole region.
But the warnings that the military money will strengthen Honduran generals at the expense of democracy aren't welcome, especially to the U.S. ambassador.
He said that those in Honduras who are opposing U.S. policy as it is designed and is implemented, we are going to regret it. To be very frank with you, people at the U.S. Embassy here only listen to those who support them. If you oppose them, you are anti-U.S., you are anti-American. They are not willing to listen to you. They want to hear their own music.
The Pentagon calls it building a shield for democracy. Daniel Ortega calls it a practice session for the invasion of Nicaragua. It is the most impressive show of American military force in Central America in more than a decade. Training exercises that will be staged again and again for years. The Pentagon won't reveal what it is spending on the construction of airfields, base camps, and other military installations here, but the total is in the hundreds of millions. And neither the Honduran Congress nor the U.S. Congress is asked for approval.
There are training opportunities there not available in the United States. You can't go out anywhere in the United States and build a big dirt airstrip. And our people have been able to do that in Honduras. Secondly, I will tell you that I had an ulterior motive in pushing that program in the beginning, and that was to see Americans, North Americans, from small towns and cities all over the country come to Central America, Honduras specifically, and begin to learn something about our neighborhood, or the area just beyond our immediate neighborhood, believing that if we ultimately are going to cement relationships and bridge a wide gap of understanding between North America and Latin America, then more North Americans need to appreciate that part of the world, appreciate the problems, and appreciate what we can do to assist in improving the welfare of those people.
The growing American presence, military payrolls and GIs spending them, provides a faint flush of prosperity to impoverished towns like Comayagua. It is new money in a very poor country.
Most of, people are real friendly down here towards Americans. So far, You got lipstick on you.
But the U.S. policy produces losers, too. The Contra War uproots thousands of peasants.
Nicaragua tiene suficiente territorio. Tiene más territorio que Honduras.
And small coffee growers suffer huge losses because the Contra army now occupies a substantial portion of Honduras. The Contras are becoming an armed nation within a nation.
It is a war that is not ours, a war that's been brought here by the United States against Nicaragua. Let them fight against Nicaragua over there. But don't bring it here. Don't bring us problems and misery.
If the purpose of the U.S. military strategy here is to intimidate Nicaragua, its immediate impact is on Honduras. For the GIs, it is a short tour in a strange place.
If we don't stop them in Honduras, I'm going to tell you, they're going to be in Kansas. It's already been shown on national TV. The Soviet Union has one philosophy and one philosophy only. We will dominate the world. Well, the United States don't want to dominate. We just want to sort of put our 6 cents worth in here and there. We've got to stay strong. We've got to support these people. We've got to take care of them because they're our Latin American brothers. And yeah, I hope the first of the year we kick some ass in Nicaragua.
In Nicaragua, the war is not fiction, it is real. And the Sandinistas begin to mobilize for a long and larger conflict. In 1983, all young men over the age of 16 are subjected to a national draft. To its architects in Washington, that means the policy is working.
As the Sandinista communist government tries to find the young men to push into its military, to grow to those huge sizes, the government of Nicaragua will become more unpopular, and more young men will decide to join the freedom fighters. And so I think what you'll see over time, provided the Congress supports the president, is the mass defection of Sandinista army units composed of young men who want democracy and don't want to serve in communist armies. And I think that as the tide of expectations turns inside Nicaragua in this political and military conflict, I think you will see the crumbling of the armed forces of the Sandinista movement.
And then the government collapses in the vacuum?
And then how the things will work out existentially is something that history will tell us.
Along the border, however, Washington's expectations are not being met. History is playing out differently. Contra field commanders complain that their troops are being underfed and poorly led. 41 of them will mutiny against their leader, Enrique Bermudez, charging corruption and mismanagement and demanding his removal. When their plea is rejected by the American advisors, some of them will abandon the struggle.
It's a shame all those years I wasted there. I did what I could. I contributed my share towards the victory.
Arlen Blandon was a Contra field commander, known as Comandante Gorrion.
Yes, I was there. I fought. But being manipulated this way and being sent there to be slaughtered, to be used as cannon fodder, as we say, no way.
By the spring of 1983, events have forced the question, does this proxy army have any real prospects for victory? While the troops flounder in the field, The American managers are called together for a reassessment.
I had a lengthy session with William Casey.
Frank McNeil was our ambassador to Costa Rica then, and a participant in the strategy session called by William Casey.
In the spring of 1983, in which the CIA official asserted that the Contras would be in Managua in about 6 months, by Christmas time of 1983. And I said, that's nonsense, politely but strongly.
Was that a sincere belief of the operators that this was going to happen, or were they just building a reality that they could sell to the top?
I think probably there was a mixture of that among the operators. If you're really committed, you believe what you want to believe. It's also politically prudent to tell the boss what they want to hear.
In fact, a collective assessment by all American intelligence agencies predicts the Contras will find it difficult to capture regional cities, let alone topple the Sandinista government. In other words, on their own, the Contras can't win.
Here's where the role of William Casey becomes important. He's the first director the CIA has ever had who was really more a politician than anything else. He came in.
John Horton was a senior Latin America analyst at the CIA.
But the difference is with Mr. Casey that he runs the CIA and he can decide what the CIA does and he can carry it to any limit he wants. And I feel that his judgment on Central America and his desire to see administration policy carried out there has meant, if not an abuse of the CIA, at least putting it back in the position where it shouldn't ever be, of being the main point element of administration policy.
The CIA director is running a war. William Casey will not be deterred by either gloomy intelligence estimates or by squeamish congressmen.
He has his intellect in one hand, then he has this feeling that, by God, these damn Democrats or these liberals or these congressmen.
What gets him up? I mean, talking about the Soviet threat?
Well, the Soviets getting away with things, and the Sandinistas getting away with. The idea of this little bunch of thugs confronting us and having their way.
Nicaragua and its army cannot be allowed to win, so the CIA escalates the war, taking a direct role in the aggression. From a mothership off the coast, the agency conducts its own attacks. As detailed in this classified CIA document, dozens of sabotage missions are launched by the agency's own employees, a special force of Latin mercenaries. They are called unilaterally controlled Latino assets.
The missions were always controlled by the CIA. Those of us who fought, who were, so to speak, the cannon fodder, were Honduran. But we were controlled by the gringos. They gave us the orders. We were at their disposal.
While the mercenaries blow up refineries and mine harbors, U.S. pilots fly back up, firing on Sandinista positions.
We sabotage harbors, refineries, shipyards, bridges. We never use our own uniforms. We use contra uniforms so that the foreign press will think the Contras were doing all the work and the Americans could walk away with their hands clean.
The U.S. directed attacks on economic targets, as well as the mining of harbors, are defined by international law as acts of aggression. But the administration continues to claim its secret war violates neither congressional restrictions nor national principles.
I think each victim is a tragedy, and it is part of war, and I think the moral responsibility for every single victim rests with the communist government of Nicaragua, just as the responsibility for every victim of World War II rests with Adolf Hitler, who initiated the conflict. And so in the same way, the communist government of Nicaragua is responsible for the armed resistance existing because it exists only because of their aggression.
By late 1983, The realities of war, as well as Sandinista mismanagement, have eclipsed their original goals. There is rationing instead of economic development. Instead of solidarity, there is popular discontent.
I am the father of a son, and I can tell you that lots of men have died in the mountains. It's not the fault of the people. It's not the fault of the people of the United States or the people of Nicaragua. It's the fault of the two governments that don't get along. That's what's happening in Nicaragua.
There's not going to be any change for as long as the war between the contras and the government goes on. It's just going to get worse every day.
Communism is neither peace nor happiness. We want to live in peace and happiness, and these guys are only bringing suffering to Nicaragua.
The war threatens Sandinista survival. They mount a major diplomatic initiative, trying to come to terms with Washington.
They told me that I could have a meeting with Secretary Schultz. So I went and I waited for 5 days. Never anywhere in the world, anywhere else, have that happened. I'm waiting there in the capital of the United States for 5 days. And then eventually I'm told that the Secretary of State had to play golf in Atlanta. And would I not be amenable to meeting with Langhor Motley? And I said, well, yes, I came very far, and I've been waiting many days. And so I met with Mr. Motley and presented our proposal. That weekend, Granada was invaded, and the secretary, I think, was still at the golf course in Atlanta.
After the invasion of Grenada, the Sandinistas moved to full mobilization. The U.S. response has made it clear that it has no intention of negotiating a settlement. A diplomatic agreement would leave the Sandinistas in power, and President Reagan wants them out. A nationwide civil guard is organized, in addition to the 40,000 regulars in the standing army, all in preparation for the feared American invasion.
Para pasar campo de obstáculos, avanzando. Avanzando, paso abajo.
More Soviet helicopters, tanks, and heavy equipment are added to the Sandinista arsenal. And U.S. aggression becomes the pretext for depriving political opponents of civil liberties.
We wanted to make sure that the United States was aware. A direct military intervention in Nicaragua would be no weekend affair, that it would be no picnic, that they would, if they came here, they would stay here, and if Americans die, then that is a heavy political price to pay back home, because Americans have been somehow educated into believing that the lives of other peoples really don't matter all that much. They don't say it that explicitly, but they really react if it's an American. It could be 100,000 Nicaraguans saying, who cares? But if it's an American, and that's why this is the diabolical nature of the thing, using people to wage a war with little political cost for the adventurer.
So you were going to raise the cost?
And so, but if they came here, we had to develop, we had to give the arms to the people.
In Washington, Congress is belatedly embarrassed and angered by revelations of the secret mining of harbors. But it still evades the tougher decision, whether to halt the irregular war.
All of us here are political animals, and we cast our votes with an eye on what the repercussions will be in the next election. If we think that the president's position is strong and that the American people are going to give some credence to him, we want to hedge our bets a good deal. It's a little harsh to say that's a gutless way to do things. It's the politically expedient way that you do when you're acting in a political milieu, as all of us are.
Once again, Congress compromises. No more military aid, no more involvement by the CIA. But they vote $27 million in so-called humanitarian aid, and that's enough to keep the proxy army alive.
There's no doubt Congress could have stopped most of the aid to the Contras if it really wanted to. Now, the administration argued that since we didn't think the forces that we were supporting had the capacity to overwhelm the government of Nicaragua, it wasn't violating the law. But that's a kind of nicety of argument that no rational human being could have accepted. And one of the lessons of it was that if the president could get away with violating the law that was on the books, it must mean that the presidency had a great deal of authority to ignore law itself.
1985. Armed with a powerful mandate, his landslide re-election victory, the president raises the political stakes on Nicaragua. He does not intend to quit.
Alfonso, Adolfo, and Arturo, would you kind of come up here and stand by my side? I want to tell you something. We're in this together. You are the future of Central America. Today I give you my solemn pledge. I will not rest until freedom is given a fighting chance in Nicaragua.
The three Contra political leaders, recruited and supported by the CIA, become their army's salesmen. Opinion polls show a majority of the American public has never supported the war. But now the president mounts a campaign to change their minds.
They are our brothers, these freedom fighters, and we owe them our help. You know the truth about them. You know who they're fighting and why. They are the moral equal of our founding fathers and the brave men and women of the French resistance. We cannot turn away from them. No evil is inevitable unless we make it so. We cannot have the United States walk away from one of the greatest moral challenges in post-war history. We will fight on. We'll win this struggle for peace. Thank you for inviting me. Viva Nicaragua Libre. Thank you and God bless you.
The president's zeal fuels a new secret operation. Run from inside the White House, armed shipments to the Contras are arranged in defiance of Congress and paid for with money from private sources, foreign governments, and profits skimmed from the Iranian arms sale. CIA veterans of Vietnam and the Bay of Pigs are recruited to handle the traffic. Then one of their planes is shot down over Nicaragua.
My name is Gene Housen,
and the operation begins to unravel.
From Marinette, Wisconsin. Can you tell us how you came to be here? Shot out of the sky.
The private management of the war will become a public controversy, but not the nature of the war itself. Nicaragua is slowly bleeding. Washington's strategy, low-intensity warfare, means a war aimed mainly at civilians. Misery, it is thought, will lead to political upheaval. Scores of health clinics and schools are destroyed. Refugees crowd into Managua, into deepening scarcity and poverty. And riding on a truck down a rural road is as dangerous as wearing an army uniform.
God warned me. I was afraid, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just give thanks to God that my son is still alive. This is my son, and my husband is here too. I don't know. They tell me he'll only lose his foot.
It is a longer-term problem that the United States has taken on, and we have to be patient enough to see it through.
But meanwhile, General, we are financing at least a modest level a proxy war against the Nicaraguan government.
That's what I read in the newspapers. I do not...
You didn't know that when you were in the government?
I do not find that illogical or morally repugnant.
I'm not talking about morally repugnant. I'm talking about what is that supposed to accomplish if you have to wait for all of these other developments in order for the Nicaraguan people to see that they don't want the Sandinista government.
It reduces the freedom of action of the Sandinista government. It engages their armed forces. It is a way to alert the Nicaraguan populace and develop a degree of popular support that ultimately will result in an uprising and an overthrow of the government. It is a way to speed along the process. It does pose problems and put pressures on the Sandinista government that can be helpful in reducing the length of time required for this. What I'm really talking about is an evolutionary solution of the problem.
You're talking about 5 or 10 years,
perhaps. We need to have that kind of patience.
By 1986, more than 20,000 Nicaraguans on both sides have died. Another 20,000 have been wounded.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States!
A majority of the American people still oppose funding the Contra War 5 years after its beginning. But congressional Democrats, driven by a mad political logic, fear that if they end the war, they will be accused of losing Nicaragua, as they were once accused of losing China and Vietnam.
I don't believe there's a majority in the Congress or the country that counsels passivity, resignation, defeatism in the face of this challenge to freedom and security in our own hemisphere.
In August 1986, Ronald Reagan wins what for Washington is really a political war. Congress votes $100 million for the Contras. But the victory will be short-lived. What began as a proxy war fought in a foreign land will come home as an epic scandal in American politics. The war goes on. Our proxy army is in the field and fighting. Honduras is armed. The Sandinistas are stronger than ever. And America's own fighting forces hover alongside. Some things are not different this time. Nicaragua appears, like Vietnam, to be a war without an ending. Once again, innocent bystanders have been pulled into our struggle. Once again, the U.S. government did not tell the truth about its intentions, nor did it confront the real costs. And once again, an American cause has become someone else's tragedy.
Most people have these fantasies, enemies, or things in their head. So they are not fighting Sandinistas, they are fighting themselves. They are fighting their own dreams, their own fantasies. And they get caught in this. And they end up believing it. So it's a kind of a self-deception, Because when you go and see the enemy, you find there are these poor ignorant peasants, or these poor women, children, and so on, who their only problem is that they are poor and ignorant, and neglected. So I just one day wake up and said, this is crazy. This is insanity. Because we are inventing reality in our heads, and then we put it on people. And then we say they are communists. We need to label them to kill them.
In this war, the people who will be killed live in cooperatives like Miraflores. Coming here, one discovers the nature of the Contra War and comes face to face with its realities.
Silvio was a real special guy. He was a peasant. He was killed about 50 feet away from here.
Paul Rice is an American agronomist who works for the Nicaraguan government, helping the peasant farmers here.
When I walked over and saw the trench where he died, I just wanted to cry. He was here the day that this cooperative was attacked, and he grabbed a gun to defend it, just like any of the other members of the cooperative. The next day, when we came up to evacuate the dead and the wounded, we found that Silvio had been castrated and that his stomach had been sliced open with a bayonet. He was alive.
This is our war. It is fought in places like this. But one thing is different this time. In our war on Nicaragua, there are no American casualties. Nicaraguans have done all the dying.
In recent weeks, the Contras have stepped up their military operations in Nicaragua. The administration is hoping for some military success to help persuade a skeptical Congress to vote for $105 million of additional aid by this fall. I'm Judy Woodruff. Please join me again for Frontline. Good night.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH, Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for Frontline was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Schools, colleges, and other organizations interested in purchasing or renting video cassettes of this program may call 800-424-7963 or write PBS Video, Post Office Box 8092, Washington, D.C. 20024.